In this lecture, we're going to take a look at the historical background of the first document of Catholic social thought, Rerum Novarum. And for this reason, we're going to be taking a look at the 19th century Catholic Church. The first and most important thing to get in our heads is this idea that Catholicism was largely a European phenomena at this time. Today we think of it as a global religion, and it has many centers of power. In those days, though, the church was really thought of as a European reality, and the rest of the world was kind of along for the ride. And the rest of the world was cast as colonies, and so the United States was thought and understood and cast in colonial terms. We were outposts in this Catholic world, whereas the center of Catholicism was Italy and France, was in the center of Europe. The same attitude prevailed for Africa, South America, Asia, anywhere else in the world other than Europe. And of course, certain centers in Europe, Rome, Avignon, Paris, these were the centers of Catholicism. Even other places in Europe, like Warsaw, Poland, were considered sort of outback. Catholicism had a center, and it was in Europe, in the Vatican. Europe, another thing to keep in mind is that Europe really had two different political economies functioning simultaneously. There was this slowly waning semi-feudal system based in land ownership on the rural estates, but there was also the rapidly advancing modern industrial capitalist system in the urban settings. The church had been aligned with the aristocratic owners of the landed estates since the Middle Ages. And so the church, once a great political, economic, social power in Europe, was becoming increasingly irrelevant because in a lot of ways they had hitched their wagon to the wrong horse. They had, they were still entrenched in this old medieval economy, this semi-feudal system based in land ownership, and meanwhile industrial capitalism was exploding across Europe, and the church in many ways was being left behind. In the middle of the century, in 1846, Pius IX is elected Pope by the College of Cardinals, and he is Pope. He's the longest reigning Pope of all time, 32 years. He will not die until 1878. At first, he was a beloved figure. He was an intellectual and someone whose views resonated with political and economic liberalism. It was expected that he would be the one to reconcile the church to all the modern political and economic movements of the day. He spoke glowingly about democracy, for instance, and about human freedom and other of these themes that were really coming out of liberal democracy. However, in 1848, revolutions broke out all around Europe, in Sicily, Paris, Berlin, and Vienna, and in the same year, the Communist Manifesto was published. In 1849, Pope Pius IX was forced to flee from the Vatican by liberal democratic rebels. A cardinal and a good friend of Pius was knifed to death on the stairs of St. Peter's. In 1850, the revolutions are suppressed, and Pius IX returns to the Vatican, a changed man. For obvious reasons. We can, if you've been the victim of exile and seen your best friends killed by revolutionaries, those are the kinds of events that will change a life. He's no longer open to new liberal democratic philosophies and governments, and in fact he repudiates liberalism and modernism. In 1864, 14 years later, Pius IX promulgates the encyclical Quanta Cura, which includes the syllabus of errors, condemning all modern political and economic innovations. In 1871, Pius IX calls an ecumenical council Vatican I, which is forced to disband early because of the Franco-Prussian War, the Paris Commune, and the eventual loss of the Vatican States to the Italian government. Vatican I is a reactionary council that defines only one doctrine, the doctrine of papal infallibility. Pius IX dies in 1878 after a 32-year pontificate. In that same year, Leo XIII is elected Pope, and he's the one who will write Rerum Novarum in 1891, which is considered the first document of Catholic social thought. It's a groundbreaking document that speaks out powerfully against the abuses of industrial capitalism. And it takes the perspective of the poor working class as normative, rather than the perspective of the aristocracy. Everyone in his day would have been expecting Leo XIII to address capitalism from the perspective of the aristocracy. They expected him to criticize and condemn capitalism, but not from the perspective of the poor working class. That was the true shocker of Rerum Novarum. That document, Rerum Novarum, has vast repercussions, both inside and outside the Church.